Well, thank you everyone for joining. We still have folks that are entering the meeting, but in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and start this webinar on helping defend your network from attacks by leveraging the CIS controls and the CIS frameworks. I'm Tom Leahy. I head up sales and business development with SureShield. I have our CTO, John DeBilligu, on with me as well, who's got in-depth knowledge into this particular security framework and amongst others. And we'll talk about how people are leveraging this today and to help them protect the ever-increasing threats of cyber attacks. So we'll briefly just cover what the Center for Internet Security is, kind of what their mission is, the controls and benchmarks that are released and what those objectives are with those controls for better cyber hygiene. We'll talk a little bit about the recent changes because they are reviewing this on a regular basis and making modifications to the benchmarks and the suggested processes for leveraging security. And then we'll talk a little bit about how technology can help, the technology from our company, to help you in implementing these controls and doing this monitoring. We'll provide a brief demo, and then at the end of the session, we'll take questions. For those of you who are interested that are part of this presentation, we'll also be offering a free vulnerability scan for external threats or the ability to actually use a solution of ours to monitor your compliance with these particular controls. So let's go ahead and get started. The Center for Internet Security, CIS, it's a nonprofit organization really focused on helping make the connected community, with everybody being so digitized these days, helping make that a safer environment by developing, validating, and promoting timely best practices that help protect against cyber threats and hacks. And this is industry-wide, both at the government, business, and personal levels. They actually offer suggestions at almost any different level of need as to how you can implement better cyber practices. And they go about that by looking at kind of a prioritized, agreed upon set of critical controls. A lot of that is drawn from NIST 853. It's also drawn from NIST 800-171. You may have also heard of the previous term SANS 20 controls. Again, it leverages a lot of other particular well-known security practice frameworks and puts it into one that's a little bit more, I would say, practical and easy for those to implement, particularly if you haven't put anything in place before. And it was developed by a consortium of some of the best security experts in the world. And again, as we said, it can be customized and applicable regardless of your size, the type of business you do, kind of your maturity level, and the level of critical data you may be working with, whether the level of likely threats. When I say that, some organizations, because of what they manage or what they have, may be higher targets for attacks than others, but really it's kind of an all-inclusive, regardless of what you do, providing you with sound information on how to protect your data. And they also, it's recommended by the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. So there's a lot of information that these organizations collect on the various types of breaches, and then companies that are recommending this as a solution or a framework for adding that in. So what are really the objectives of CIS? And I'll speak briefly to this graphic if you can see it here, but it really sets a strong foundation for good cyber hygiene practices. And it leverages and uses science or data to drive the models. They take that information and basically with that, they translate that into action, meaning actions you can take. Those are the CIS benchmarks that come to light, the CIS controls. And it starts with, as I said, leveraging data and repeating this process regularly. So once they have collected a lot of information, they use this, what they call the MITRE attack framework. It's the adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge framework. And that framework allows them to kind of look at any different type of attack type and what those attack techniques are by those that are stealing or trying to steal data. And they basically refer to those as attack patterns. So what are the patterns that are coming in? And then what are the most prevalent attack types that they're going after? And so they look at those attack types and the patterns, and they then kind of track that with safeguards that can help defend against each of the techniques found in those attacks, right? So they look at what are the various types of techniques, and then what are the best safeguards to prevent those types of attacks, and then basically come out and release those as safeguards that will be most effective for those attack types. So that's the MITRE framework. And it's constantly updated because it's going to be looking at industry, like you said, data, putting that into that framework, and then coming back out and repeating with controls or suggestions or safeguards that can be utilized to help prevent those. And as we know, this is a pervasive and ongoing process. So it's a very useful and helpful methodology for looking at how you can do continuous cyber hygiene management. And as I said before, it's relatively, it works for everybody. And you'll see in the next slide, they've kind of identified currently what are the most prevalent types of attacks, and they've broken this into groups. So basically there's about, I think there's 153 different ultimate controls, but they've broken them out into different groups, understanding that trying to implement everything can be difficult, and it really depends on what type of organization you are and what type of data you may be dealing with. So currently there's three group types. There's the implementation group one, and really this is kind of what you would call essential cyber hygiene practices that need to be implemented. Two is really for those enterprises that have maybe a larger IT infrastructure in multiple departments, and just helping them understand things that should be implemented at that end. And then it moves up to IG level 3, and keeping in mind each one of those is a subset of the other. And they break that out then into groupings and safeguard types. So with the recent CIS report that was laid out, they identified what are the 5 most prevalent attack types that are out there. And those include things like malware, ransomware, hacking into web applications, insider privilege and misuse, meaning folks that have information and either be intentionally misusing that or unintentionally misusing that. And then targeted intrusions. What are, areas that they're going to focus specifically on in going after and attacking. And I just want to note down below here, you will see a reference link to this particular report. A lot of these graphics came from a recent V8 report, CIS version 8 report that just came out, or the 2.0 report, which includes the new version 8. And what you'll see is if, interesting information that just implementing what they would consider the easiest safeguards, those at implementation group 1 levels, you can see what the prevalence of avoiding attacks is across each one of these areas. So, if you are implementing at a level 1 or an implementation group 1, the data is showing that you're basically going to have like an 80% if you were to go across these risk protection by implementing these types of techniques and using these safeguards. Now, of course, if you improve and increase that those numbers are going to go up significantly. Always, and of course, always noting that no one will ever be 100% protected. But again, the CIS benchmarks and safeguards are great ways to start for folks that maybe don't have a good security kind of policy and procedure process in place. And even if you do, it's an industry standard that's holds up to any other really well-known security framework. We've heard of CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a component of the federal government that releases information on known attacks and exploits and what to do about those. You've heard of NIST, you've heard of HIPAA. This kind of encompasses almost all of those in perhaps a little bit easier to digest process. So again, this was going over and looking at a number of these safeguards and controls and what gets addressed and what they will basically address by getting implemented. And you can see this chart also helps show that based upon what level you implement at, what the safeguard processes are going to be to help you in that. So at a bare minimum, as we said, identifying and looking at that implementation group one and what the safeguards are in around that are critical and important. So it helps provide a strong foundation for good cyber security. And recently, as part of the most recent update, as we said, because we will go back to how the methodology works, they recently just updated to a CIS 8.0 controls. And it actually reduced the numbers by a couple. I think it's down to 18, it was at 20. And so within that, of course, there's a number of controls that make up each one of those implementation groups. And within these control frameworks, there's a number of different controls that are part of this and policies that are part of this as well. So how can SureShield help you with this? Well, we provide a technology framework that can, one, help you do compliance audits against the CIS VA controls, and I'll show that to you. So basically, it's a good way to start in and look at those controls and determining what you do and don't have in place, and then being able to go and implement other protection techniques to help you meet not just the compliance requirements of those or be in compliance with those, but help improve your cyber posture and get you to those levels that are going to protect you, 80 to almost, depending on how sophisticated you are, to 90% risk. So we provide a compliance framework that can help you do that. We also provide a security scanning tool and remediation tool that help meet the control guidelines in here. And then Chandi will speak a little bit to the configuration and policy checks for compliance that we also do in here, where we can leverage scans that we do and help you look and see if you are meeting certain configuration requirements and policies that relate to CIS. And then, of course, we provide reports on gaps. So across these 18 different controls with the solutions that we have, we cover about, I would say, 80 to 85% of each one of these controls with one of our solutions. And the names of those come, as I said, it's a platform that can be used for turning on for anything that you may want to do. We have the compliance framework, which I'm going to show you, that allows you to do your compliance assessments against any type of compliance regulatory framework. We're going to highlight how that's being used, how you can use this for CIS. As I mentioned, we'll also show you vulnerability scanning tools. We have a dark web tool that can actually go out and help you understand where external threats may have already happened, or breaches that may have already happened, so that you can identify those and not only just identify them, but take action to eliminate them. And then lastly, we provide a number of automated reporting solutions for you for that. So I'm going to pause here briefly and go into just a brief overview of our platform for those of you who are participating in this meeting, particularly if you are focused on implementing strong cyber practices. We are happy to speak with you later about how we might be able to help you with that. So let me go and come basically to our solution framework. And we're kind of what I would call dashboard driven. So in this case, I'm in a CIS Controls demo. And what it's showing me here within this environment are the different controls that I'm managing, the policies that are related to that. So we actually package and integrate policies that are relevant to any type of framework controls. We have these for HIPAA, we have these for obviously CIS, we have them for folks of you may have heard of CMMC. It's a government-related Department of Defense system coming into place, the NIST 800-171. All of these we have, and we map the controls to the policies, and we give that to you as an option to look at, to either instantiate for yourself or update with your own, or edit the ones that we have, but most importantly, by tying them to the controls when you're doing either a compliance audit or you're doing a scan on your assets, we can help you understand whether there's policies that are now not, compliant or non-compliant. And you can see in this example, there's a couple of policies that currently are not meeting compliance requirements, not being followed. So this dashboard in this case is giving me a view into the controls that we're managing, the policies. It's also doing what I call a security scanning system. So it is going out and it's scanning the assets within this demo customer and helping understand what assets sit out there and what vulnerabilities sit on those assets. Most importantly, what we provide is how to remediate and take care of those vulnerabilities. And then we've also expanded that. We mentioned earlier the CISA known exploits that are released. They are a subset of any type of vulnerability scan, so we can call those out for you. And after I go through an overview of a little bit of the compliance framework for this, I'm going to have our CTO, Chandi Bilagu, speak specifically about the configuration check and how that is done. So let me just show you a bit about the compliance auditing that can be done here. Again, as I mentioned, we provide a variety of different frameworks, but in this environment, we have implemented the frameworks across all three different implementation groups. So you can see you can filter your data based upon the controls in each one of those groups. So if I just wanted to look at the group 1 controls, you can see that will take me down to just processing and showing me what are the controls associated with that group 1. As you recall, there are 18 different domains. If I wanted to just look at things at the domain level, I can do that. So you can see in this particular filter, I've looked at the access controls and management that relate to group 1. If there were more that were expanded to group 2, then they would show up, and you can see how these have now expanded to the group 2 related additional controls, and the same with the group 3. So a lot of different ways that you can take a look and manage this information. Once you are in there doing this, let's say you are doing your initial audit against the controls, it really goes into just clicking on these hyperlinks. And then you can see we've frameworked, or we've modeled this based upon the recommended, what I would call answers to a control question that was provided by CIS. And these are what those are. So you can go in, you can get guidance on how to follow this practice. You can see the associated policies. You can see the procedures and tools that might be associated with that. And then any control impact parameters that may be in here as well. So you can see as I click on any one of these, I can go in and get more information on what I might need to do to make sure that I'm in compliance with this and to follow that. I can add comments, and I could also go ahead and upload evidence to help me support that I'm doing those things. This becomes even more important if in any case you are going to be audited for practice. It will help you support why you have these good sound practices in place and have the evidence that will help you support that. So once that information is captured and collected, this particular site doesn't have a tremendous amount of data updated in it right now, but you can come in and go in and run any kind of reports that you want on that. So within here, we have reports on compliance, we have executive summary reports, all that can be used to take to management or to be used to say, here's where we are and here's where we need to get, and to help support getting there. So I'm going to just go back to the dashboard briefly and speak again to security related items that we also provide. So you can see in this particular, again, dashboard, it's color coded. So it's trying to give me visuals as to helping me understand where I really may need to take some action and attention. Again, well, you already said you're never going to cover everything, but if you are going to be taking action, you want to focus it on the things that are going to reduce your risk profile to the greatest degree. So you can see I can kind of visually go in and look at segment my data in a lot of different ways. So in this environment, I have 268 assets that have 3,000 pieces of software sitting on them. And we've already exposed, in this case, close to 10,000 different vulnerabilities that exist. And then I also have information that will tell me what needs to be done and what are the processes that need to be done to remediate those items. If I were just to go ahead and click into, let's just say, the software assets, again, keeping in mind the filtering that I have. So it's showing me all the assets in this environment. If I just wanted to look, let's say, at the critical severities, it will show me what IPs are on, what, the name of the area that it's sitting, the server or whatever that may be, what the degree of risk is. And again, if I were to go into this, it will give me further data. Again, if I'm with someone running regular scans, it will show me progression over time in terms of what my profile looks like. And then it will tell me what vulnerabilities sit on this particular machine. And most importantly, it will also tell me how I go ahead and remediate that problem. So how do I get rid of that particular problem that is there right now to lower that score? Again, to not only improve my cyber posture, but also to assure my compliance with these items as well. And I'll come back and speak to some of the reports that you can run out of here as well. But I'm going to ask Chandi to just step in for a minute, if you're there, to speak to the additional configuration check processes that we do on this, Chandi.
Yes, Tom. As you have explained, Center for Internet Security actually not just puts out these control frameworks, which are more for assessing broadly a compliance. They also have specific benchmarks for different platforms. Like, for example, if you have a Windows 10 machine, what is the best way to secure that machine? So they have a list of benchmarks which can be checked by a vulnerability scanner doing config checks to check for compliance on those. So as an example, what we populated here is a check on a few machines, and it is telling there are 214 of those checks that actually fail. So that's what this explains. So each of these, like for various areas within the machine, like how is your Microsoft Access if it's installed on that, how is your Edge, or how is Internet Explorer, how are they configured? And there are recommendations for each of these, and it is checking against that. If you click on any one of those blue ones, yeah, for example, it is saying that you need to set some of these things to disabled or enabled. So it is checking against that and telling whether you have any of the computers which are set properly, or all of them are set wrong. In this case, because this is a test environment, every one of the hosts have failed. And how do you actually verify that if you click on it? So it explains to you the rationale behind why this kind of setting is required to secure the environment, and what you really need to do to make that setting happen, and which are the machines on which this is missing. So this helps you actually set them right. And if you have a domain controller in your environment, all these can be set using group policy objects to make it easy for configurations. So the check here is more from the benchmark perspective. What is a secure configuration for any particular kind of device, and whether the device is configured according to that.
Excellent, excellent. So what we've done is kind of combined what I would call the technology with validating against the benchmarks and the policies, and that's all in a what I would call a semi-automated fashion with us to help you meet these control requirements. Just briefly, we do also, as I mentioned, have a couple of other tools that can help do things like look at breaches and look at critical assets in your environment. One, to help you, this is a dark web monitoring tool that can help you look at where you may have credential information and problems with those. And more importantly, as I said, to go into those and view those and take action to fix those. Again, a component of the controls that you would need to implement. We also have an even more sophisticated data protection tool. So you may have, depending upon the implementation group that you're in, needs to process even more secure protections on certain critical assets or data in your environment. I oftentimes make the analogy to one, you first want to protect your house, and you protect your house by identifying where there might be ways to get into it, cracked windows, doors that don't work, and the likes. And you do all you can to lock all that down to prevent anybody from getting in. But should they get in and even get through a very strong protected environment, there might be certain valuables within that household that you want to put a further level of protection on, your jewelry, your watches. And so you might have a safe, or you might have another area that helps lock down and make sure even if someone were to penetrate that they can't get at that. And that's what this particular solution called Hack Shield does, is it allows you to identify critical information in your environment. And we have a lot of different ways in which you can go about indicating what you want it to look for. Do you want it to look for credit card data? Do you want to look for PHI data? Do you want it to look for CUI data? Do you want to look for GDPR related data? And it will go out on the endpoints and identify and tell you where all that sensitive data sits. It will also help you understand what the exfiltration of that is, meaning what has happened in terms of the movement of that data. And lastly, it allows you to write rules to prevent inappropriate movement of that data. So let's say someone was trying to send out PHI data in the worst case scenario, to someone that was a dark web thief that wanted to sell that information. If they tried to send that to them and I had the appropriate safeguards on this, they could send it, but when that person tried to open it, it would be encrypted and they could not open it up. So it really has some kind of unique methodologies to help provide further protection. Again, helping depending on where you are and if you were looking at these controls, to implement at the highest level of protection on that information. Lastly, we just wanted to point out, Here again, as we said, a lot of different reports. So I also mentioned you have things like security related reports. And again, because this is so pervasive and because you can't necessarily always address everything, you can run information off of our systems that will help you understand, hey, where can I get the biggest bang for my buck to help protect my environment? And within that, then you can see, again, I can filter on all of this data. But if I were to run this report, it will basically help tell me where I have specific issues and how I can resolve those issues and what would be the remediation timeframe for doing that. What are the processes for doing that remediation and how long is that going to take for me? So a lot of good outputs that can be used, and those outputs can be provided to you in, you can schedule those reports for that purpose. You can move them into Word documents. You can put them into Excel or PowerPoint presentations. So you can see in this particular one, we're looking at a top remediation report. We wanted on the top 20 remediations. It would give us the biggest bang, and it will tell you what the severity of those are, the vulnerabilities that are there, and then the process of, by applying those to a certain number of hosts, what's it going to do in terms of reducing my risk profile, my vulnerabilities, and what's it going to do to improve my risk mitigation. So really useful and helpful type reports. So I'm going to pause there and go back to the presentation. And just briefly go into, how we can help. Obviously, we can help provide almost complete security protection. As you noted, we help in meeting the CIS V8 guidelines. We attack with our solutions close to 80% of those, what I would call domain areas with our solutions. It's a very inexpensive solution to deploy and maintain. It also has a lot of flexibility, meaning you can use it for the purposes of what you want, whether you want to do an initial compliance assessment, whether you want to do, a scan of your environment and then help implement those remediation processes. We have all of those for you. And as we know, these attacks were only going to continue to escalate. We see it every day. This particular framework is a very solid, very scientific, very well process-oriented methodology to help implement what you would call a sound cyber and security practice methodology and process. And while there's a lot of complexity behind it, the methodology is rather simple, and by looking at that and following that, it can help you and your organization at whatever level you may be, put in a very, sound system and in a very sound continued state of readiness process. So with that, it looks like we may have bought back some folks some time. I'm going to just launch a brief poll for those participants that are here. As I mentioned, we have offered, we're going to be offering our solution, any one of the products for you to test out. We will be happy to do what we call an external threat report, where we can look at your domain and tell you where you may also have some, issues of threats that we can point you to help fix. So for those who are participating, if you are interested in trialing any one of these solutions, just indicate so in the poll, and we will reach out to you to get you set up on that. And I'll leave this open briefly while we go ahead and take any questions. I know, Chandi, I think some folks joined a little bit later. Can you just help me understand the questions that were answered or asked? And I see that there was just some that related towards the content. Yes, I do want to remind that for those of you who have participated here today, you will be sent a thank you for attending. So we appreciate you being here. And you'll also be receiving the content of the presentation as well as this webinar presentation.
Yes, Tom, mostly the content related questions. So we answered all of them.
Okay. And then I've seen another one that's asking, can you explain the security and vulnerability? How does that work? I mean, do they have to install equipment on site to run those, or basically how do you run your scans, and who do you use to do that?
Yeah, so for vulnerability scanning, we have a piece of code that needs to be installed inside the network for internal network scans. One per environment is good enough, so it can actually go and probe all the machines that it can reach from that wherever it's installed, and then look for vulnerabilities. We also have provision to scan external facing assets, so that doesn't require any installation. So we have scanners sitting in the cloud which could scan all your internet exposed assets. So even for remote, in the current pandemic era where a lot of people have gone remote, we have a solution for that as well, where you could actually install an agent on all the remote machines, and they basically scan for vulnerabilities and update back to give you a comprehensive dashboard.
Thanks, John. And I don't see any other questions at this time. So we want to thank all of you who have participated here today for joining this session. Please, in whatever you're doing, obviously, because of the nature of this digital environment, whatever you decide to do, putting sound and utilizing sound foundational frameworks for doing this is important. And CIS obviously is one particular process and framework that's well recognized and can help you, regardless of what type of company you are, what maturity level you are. The fundamental background and foundation of this can help any organization, person, business, government entity, whatever that may be. So again, thank you all for your time today, and be on the lookout for the webinar recording to come to you, as well as the content of the presentation. And should you have an interest in trying our solutions, please reach out to us as well. Thank you all for your time today, and hope you stay safe and stay cyber safe. Thank you.